Good morning, math class. Again, we are going to now take on day 2 of review of equation solving. Just like yesterday, we're going to talk about a few steps of equation solving, go over a couple problems together. You are going to do some independent practice, but today is going to be a little bit harder in the sense that we're just going to add a few more steps to our equation solving process. So today, our essential question is, how do I solve a multi-step equation? Yesterday, we learned once again how to solve two-step equations or equations that involve the distributive property. Today, we are going to specifically talk about how do we solve multi-step equations, how do we solve equations with x on both sides, how do we solve equations that have x on both sides and have parentheses, and all of those things we are going to get into throughout this video today. So the first thing that we need to do is take some notes. And once again, you should have your piece of paper in front of you or your worksheet in front of you. And together we're going to go through this and go over some guided notes once again so we can understand how to solve multi-step equations. So the first thing is the goal of equation solving is to isolate the variable, and we talked about that yesterday. So once again, isolate the variable. And to put it into a term that we all can understand, and just to make it a little bit easier for us to know, is this simply means get x on the same side. So once again, when we talk about equations that have x on different sides, when we talk about equations that have x on either side of the equal sign, we need to get it on one side. The second part of our guided notes is once again those steps and the steps to solving multi-step equations. There are 4 parts here, and as long as we can do each part and understand what each part means, then we should be good to go. So once again, one of the first things that we need to do is distribute we need to be able to distribute if there are parentheses. If there are numbers that are like terms, then our second step here is to combine like terms and get them on each side, okay? Once again, part 3 here, or part C, is to get x on the same side, and I can't stress enough how that is going to be very important. And finally, we just solve the two-step equation. To review what those 2 steps are is we add or subtract, okay, using opposite operation to get the term with x by itself. And finally, we either multiply or divide to get the variable by itself. So the next part of your worksheet here is that guided practice section. And again, we are going to go over a few problems together. For this video and for this worksheet, I'm not going to ask you to check any of your equations, but once again, we want to make sure that we show all of our work. So the very first thing that we should always be doing, and just like yesterday, is always put that line down the equal sign. I want to make sure that my equation's balanced, so whatever I do on one side, I have to make sure I also do on the other. The first thing that I want to look at are my values or my terms with x. So I have a 3x and a negative 2x. I always like to move the smaller term. In this case, the smaller term is that negative 2x. If I want to move that term, I have to use opposite operations. The opposite of a negative is to just add 2x to both sides. Once again, I know that these cancel, and I'm going to start with the right side of my equation. Since I've moved the negative 2x by adding 2x to both sides, I am left with a negative 12. On the left side of my equation, I can now add 3x plus 2x to make 5x and that plus 3 remains the same for right now. My next step, now that I have a two-step equation, is to just simply get x by itself. Get that 5x by itself first. So I need to look at that plus 3. Opposite operation would be to subtract 3 to both sides. That leaves me with 5x equals negative 12 minus 3 is a negative 15. My last step here is to get x by itself. And once again, opposite operations tells me to divide both sides by 5. And in this case, I would get x equals negative 3. I circle my answer, and I am done with our first problem. As I move towards my second problem, I now see that this problem is a little bit different. There's something going on here that I didn't have in the first problem. Again, I want to make sure that I put my line down the equal sign, keep my equation balanced. But in this case, I have 5x and negative 2x on the same side. The first thing I need to do is make sure that I combine like terms. If I combine that 5x and negative 2x, I have 3x. The plus 7 stays the same. And the entire right side of my equation as 7x minus 13 also stays the same since I didn't touch that yet. Once again, I now have x on the same side, and I want to make sure that I move the smaller x value. In this case, that means that I'm going to move the 3x. Opposite operations would tell me to subtract 3x from both sides. These would cancel out. I would be left with 7 on the left side of my equation, and now I need to just simplify the right side of my equation. 7x minus 3x gets me 4x, and that minus 13 still stays the same since I haven't really touched that yet. In this case, now I want to look at that negative 13. I want to try to get 4x by itself. So in order to move minus 13 or negative 13, I have to add 13 to both sides. And when I simplify this, I'm left with a 4x equals 7 plus 13, which is 20. The very last part of my equation here is simply get x by itself by dividing by 4. Divide by 4. And here, I would get the answer of x equals 1. And I'm actually going to put it above the equals or above our equation because that's where I currently have room. The very last guided practice question on this video and on your worksheet is 2 times the quantity of 3x plus 4 equals 4x plus 20. And once again, we see here that there is a set of parentheses in my equation, which means that I need to use the distributive property. So as I get ready to solve this equation, again, I need to draw that line down the equal sign to keep my equation balanced. And since I have parentheses and I know that I need to use the distributive property, I like to draw my arrows to both the terms inside my parentheses. And once again, I know that we are multiplying here. 2 times 3x is 6x. 2 times a positive 4 is a positive 8. And on the right side of my equation, 4x plus 20 just remains the same. Now that I've simplified my equation a little bit, I can see that once again I have a multi-step equation with x on both sides. I want to be able to move the smaller x value. In this case, that means that I'm going to move 4x. The opposite operation of a positive 4 would be negative 4, so I'm going to subtract 4x to both sides. That means that these terms cancel. On the right side of my equal sign, I'm left with a positive 20. On the left side of my equal sign, I need to simplify a little bit. I have 6x minus 4x, which just gets me 2x, and that plus 8 then remains the same. Again, I'm now left with a two-step equation, which means all I need to do is add or subtract first. In this case, opposite operations would tell me to subtract 8 to both sides, leaving me with 2x equals 20 minus 8, which is 12. And last but not least, I'm supposed to divide by 2. And then that gets me the answer of x equals 6. Once again, circle your answer. We've now answered all 3 questions. They got progressively harder as we went through each one. But once again, these are the 3 types of multi-step equations that you could see. At this point in the video, I would like you to pause the video and complete the 4 practice problems on your worksheet. Once again, I want to make sure that you show all of your steps. You should be able to use the guided practice questions or the examples that we just went over to help you, but please make sure that you are working through those problems. At the bottom of your worksheet is a challenge problem, and I'm actually going to go over that here in the next part of the video. Now, the challenge problem, this is as hard as it can get. And once again, we know that there are parentheses on both sides of our equal sign. When we see parentheses in an equation, we know that we have to use the distributive property. And first and foremost, we draw that line down the equal sign, making sure that our equation is balanced. And since there are parentheses on both sides of my equal sign, I have to distribute on both sides. As I distribute on both sides, I multiply, so 5 times x, or I could think of 1x, so that would remain 5x. 5 times a positive 2 is 10. 3 times 2x is 6x, and 3 times 1 is a positive 3. Again, now that I simplified, I have just a regular multi-step equation with x on both sides. So the next thing that I need to do is move the smaller x value. In this case, I look at 5x or 6x, and I know that 5x is smaller. Opposite operations would tell me to subtract 5x from both sides. These would cancel, and I would be left with 10 equals 6x minus 5x is just 1x plus 3. The very last thing that I want to do is make sure that I get 1x by itself. In this case, I need to make sure that I use opposite operations and subtract 3 from both sides, leaving me with 1x equals 7. Now I understand that there's a 1 in front of x. I could divide by 1 if I want to, but I already know that my answer is simply just x equals 7. I circle my answer, and I am done. We are now done with the worksheet, and something that I want to touch base on is what are we going to do next, and what is next for us this week. So Thursday, you will be completing an equation quiz on Google Classroom, and I will be posting that at 8 a.m. on Thursday morning. There are 8 questions. You will use your notebook and your calculator to show all of your work. It is a multiple choice quiz. You will select your answer, and when you are done, you will receive a score. I would like you to get a score of 75% or better. If you do not get 75% or better, I do ask that you retake it or email me, and I can send it to you again. On Friday, and every Friday moving forward, we're going to complete progress monitoring practice. This week's progress monitoring practice is going to be on problem solving, and you will receive an email from me on what you are supposed to do for that. The very last thing I want to touch base on is, again, if you need help, if something's just not clicking for you, or if you need me to clarify and go through a problem with you together, please email me. We always have time to meet virtually and over the computer. But once again, if you need help, please check in with me and please let me know.